Alright, we've taken a look at what standard form is, what it's useful for. Now we're going to talk about how to rewrite a standard form equation into slope-intercept form, or y equals mx plus b. And while there are a couple shortcuts for taking your standard form and writing it, or finding the slope and finding the y-intercept, it's more useful to actually rewrite it in slope-intercept form, because your calculator, the one you're actually allowed to use, won't graph a standard form equation. So if we take a look at 2x minus 3y equals 6, you can see it gives you an error. It's not going to actually graph this for you, and this is one of the main reasons why it's really important you're using this green calculator when you're practicing, because if you get too used to using the quote-unquote illegal Desmos, it does graph these standard form equations, but you will not be able to do it on the test, and as a result, you won't have practiced turning these into slope-intercept form, so that way you can actually graph them on your test. So this is a really important skill, even though there are shortcuts for finding the slope and y-intercept. So there is a bit of a pattern or a formula to rewriting these equations in slope-intercept form. This sheet outlines it in, I guess, ways that help you remember. So the first thing you're going to do every single time is you have your x and y on the same side of the equation. But if you look at slope-intercept form, we essentially need to isolate the y. What's weird about this is normally when we isolate a variable, we're looking to move all the constants to one side and combine like terms, so that way we only have one variable equal to a number. This time we have two variables in our equation, so we're going to use the same strategies to manipulate the variables. The only difference is we have more than one. So the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to need to take this x and move it to the other side. And this kind of makes sense. If we're trying to get y by itself, I need to add or subtract anything that's on the same side as y first. So every single time you're taking a standard form equation and rewriting it into slope-intercept form, a form that's more useful, you're going to subtract 2x, or subtract whatever x on both sides. If it's a 4x, you're going to do minus 4x. If it's an 8x, whatever it is, you're going to move the x to the other side by usually subtracting. It's possible for your x to be negative, but it should be positive. The a value should be positive most of the time. So once you've done that, and you can see it's done here, and then they just rewrote it. They put the negative 2x first, and then the positive 6 second. It doesn't really matter. If you wanted to write it as negative 3y equals 6 minus 2x, you can. It's all the same thing. But what's really most important is that you keep the value of each term. So you'll notice the sign in front of 3y was negative to start with. It needs to be negative in this next step. When I subtracted 2x, that is negative now, so it needs to be negative when I write it, wherever I put it. This 6 had no sign in front of it, so it needs to be positive when I write it in my equation here. So all that to say, we have to move the x. And then after that, we need to divide. So it says the great divide. So whatever number's in front of y at this time, it can be positive, it can be negative, you need to divide that across every single term. And this is where adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing are very different in an equation. When you add and subtract, you can do that by doing it once on each side to keep the equation balanced. So you only end up adding and subtracting once, because one addition and one subtraction on each side keeps the equation balanced. But when you multiply and divide, it needs to affect every single term in the equation in order to keep it balanced. So when I divide by -3, I'm not just going to divide this term. I'm not just going to divide this term on the other side. I have to divide it across both terms to keep my equation balanced. So we divide all three terms. My -3y, or my -3 cancels, and I'm left with y, which was our goal. So now it's in y equals form. And then here, the two negatives cancel, but my slope becomes 2/3. And then 6 divided by -3 is -2, which now shows us our y-intercept. So when all this is done, we now have identified our slope of 2/3. We now have identified our y-intercept of -2. And from there, we're done. We've rewritten it. We can now take this equation, put it into Desmos, and if you need to find a point off the line, if there's some other piece of information you want to know about it, you can now graph it in Desmos and use this equation for whatever purpose you have. So it is that simple, but it is going to take some practice. So I'm going to write a couple practice problems. I want you to pause and try this process on your own and see if you can figure out how to get this to work. 4x plus 3y equals 9. All right, so this is a standard form equation. They're all whole numbers. This can now be rewritten in slope-intercept form. I want you to go ahead and try it. All right, so you paused the video, you tried it. Let's go ahead and do the two-step process. First, we're going to move the x. So when you do this, 4x cancels. Going to bring down 3y. And again, remember, you can write it in either order. So if I want to put it as -4x plus 9, that's fine. If I want to do 9 minus 4x, that's fine. Now, this time, my y is positive. So I'm going to divide both sides by a positive y value, or a positive coefficient of 3, instead of the negative. Whatever your coefficient is, you need to use that value. So if it's negative to start, you need to divide by negative. And there it is. We can see our slope is -4/3. You can see our y-intercept is 3. We'll do one more, and then you're on your own. Try to practice this because this is going to be one of the most useful skills as far as dealing with standard form equations. 5x minus 2y equals 10. All right, so same thing. Try it on your own. Exact same steps every single time. Minus 5x minus 5x negative 2y equals 10 minus 5x. Essentially, don't forget, if you don't do something to a term in an equation, you bring it down just as it was before. Divide both sides, and that means every term, by -2. I'm left with y equals -5 plus 5/2. And you'll see, this time I kept it kind of in line with the way it was. Instead of moving my y-intercept or my constant to the right, it really doesn't matter. If you want to rewrite it from here in a more familiar slope-intercept form, that absolutely works as well. The key thing is that you just remember to keep your values consistent. So my 10 was positive, it stayed positive. My -5 got divided by a -2, so it became positive. When I divided 10 by -2, it became negative. Now we see our slope, 5/2, and our y-intercept, -5. Good luck.